Another aspect, similarly to the earlier project, what came into the project was that this client was not wanting to have a showroom. They were really after a museum. And the argument was, and I love the argument, was that if you come in a MoMA and the helicopter is one of the first objects you see hanging in the void space, why is it not possible that a car can also not be seen as an art piece? So I thought that was quite amazing for, at that time, Professor Hubert, who was the director of Mercedes, and believed that we really had to go for a museum. And his argument was that with that we could gather a far more broader public, bringing here to the project than only people who are interested in this particular type of brand. But anyway, so it became a museum, and you have to understand, when you come into this building, there are 3 elevators, you can go up to the highest level, then there is a way of taking one pathway down, and you can see that one level is non-touching the other level, so there are always different heights within the whole building. If you see the building from the outside, it's almost like if the building is having 3 floors only, but if you come into it, then it's highly complex in its diversity of different plateaus to be found in the building. Some of them have a view towards the outside, and some have a view towards the inside. So in the continuity of floors being sometimes turned into a wall, we know that from some ideas being further developed in the late 90s. We here wanted to combine that with this idea of the twist. The twist holds up the building by these 4 moments within the building and disciplines the building. So in that sense, I mean, it looks highly complex, but in a way there are a lot of repetitive elements to be found in the way how the building is structured. As you can see here with the plateaus, they have all the same radius as the twist. The twist is simply repeated, and casting techniques have been repeated during the production process. Although you might argue, yeah, but if I look at the glass windows, then there maybe even up to a few hundred who are different in size. Here, similarly, in the production process, 2 angles were always the same, and the 3rd angle was a variation of the 2, and then cut in such a way that they could be produced in almost 2 weeks. But the idea was a model what is a trifold structure. It's a mathematical model. You can see here it's stretched up, and it's not. This is not the building, but it is the mathematical extrusion of this model, as I explained. The dissection is far more complex. It folds itself open in many different layers, like a flower. So it's not this, but it's more diverse. As you can see here, this is one pathway with one route you can take from the internal, more inwards-looking exhibition spaces, and this is the pathway with the external exhibition spaces. So this twist was not the first twist we designed. We have tested it in other projects like this house in upstate New York, a sensitive project I not always like to show, but so many people know that it doesn't exist anymore. But still, for that reason, want to explain that before we had tested ideas on this level, we constantly, in a serial manner, want to bring these aspects of the work forwards. And this is another aspect I'd like to bring further towards the idea of maybe the notion of the new understanding of how we can produce today. Why could we not think in more serial manners in architecture? How would it be possible that that again is in other professions far more accepted? We don't believe so strongly anymore in the ultimate masterpiece we can produce every once 10 years. We believe that in production. Many architects have been again saying to us, I mean, how can you keep the intellectual argument going and be so academic on the one hand, teach in many places and at the same time produce so much? But we often believe that the production gives you the enormous amount of lessons whereby one can learn how to exchange with. That's what I'd like to sometimes call also reverse engineering. what can give you reverse engineering towards the way how one can learn from building techniques towards design. Here simply similar ideas of the equal potential towards the more transformative aspect of ideas. What I can also see, for instance, in this house, this is a house, what is starting with an equal potential structure where one can seclude oneself in the house, and there where in the middle the twist generates a public moment within the house, or a semi-public, because it's of course the family who's there. In the house it's another aspect I would like to give towards the argument of the transformative here in architecture. So it is creating always an interactive moment within the way how this what a bit more looser aspect of the architecture is introduced here towards the more individual experience of the secluded aspects of the geometry of this house. So it always generates, for that reason, and communication with its context. But as I said, the smaller projects like the pavilions, the prototypes, as I'd like to lately call them, they spin an enormous amount of opportunities for all our different scales within the work. From furniture design, sometimes we have towards the urban or the large-scale projects. But in the complexity, we are often after the way how this reductiveness, like what is called the box side of the architecture and the more infrastructural side of the architecture, how these can also generate different spatial effects. And maybe the reason why we are interested in this notion of the transformative is that we are fascinated in the idea maybe that we can liberate any stylistic references towards the way how we might pinpoint at a particular geometrical principle in architecture that can give you an one-dimensional style. We, for instance, in the Möbius house discovered that by repeating the 9 degrees towards the the 7 degrees towards the 9 degrees and the 11 degrees generated an enormous amount of calmness in the house. Whereas it looks very complex when you are in the house. You might think it's quite diverse and very difficult to build. In the same time, but by repeating these angles, again, in the serial experience of the spatial, it generated an enormous amount of reductiveness. So this is what I'm like to argue also here, is that diversity and complexity doesn't generate particularly complex spatial experiences. A line might be in its geometry repeated, slowly turning into a surface and then becoming a volume, as we tested in this case, and then played with in a later project in Chicago for the pavilion of the Millenium Park, where, as you can see, it's not a building. It's not yet even a pavilion, we'd like to argue. It is a testing ground for the way how, as a reference here maybe to Chicago, and you can see maybe the reminiscences of some of the aspects of the history of Chicago in this prototype. But what is the most important is that we also wanted to work with these diagonal vistas, what you not can often find so much in a city like Chicago. Maybe we can find them in the plan of Burnham. You know, the vistas are there to be found in the organization of the plan of the city, but not in a sectional manner in the way how we introduce these spatial effects within the city itself. So we call this the urban lobby of Chicago, and wonderfully enough, in the night it became a very interesting public space, always, every night, from tango lessons having been given to its other activities, so that again this became a public space within a public space. This topic now exhibited with my position right now in Harvard, exhibited in the exhibition there we explain that these prototypes are key elements in our work. So talking about maybe developing sometimes a particular element in your work in a serial manner, these these prototypes generate an enormous amount of spin-off, like maybe we could say with a prototypical element we can introduce in product design, they generate an enormous amount of spin-off for architecture. This is a loft for a friend, client we designed here in New York, who was interested in to live, and what he wanted already for a long time, to live with his art collection, whereby we argued that it would be so nice with the art collection to introduce, by opening up the back of the apartment, so that it would become itself a dynamic artwork in the connection to his, the rest of his artwork, so that constantly being in the collection, this would become maybe his most important part of the collection, where there is always life within this aspect of the collection again, so equal potential, and then slowly moving towards the more softer part of the entrance area of the building. Also here, LED lighted space were introduced in order to suggest a double height space, very light floors to make sure that the light is reflected back onto the artworks. And really with a wonderful collection here, one could live with a series of spaces whereby with changing possibly the carpet to another part of the apartment, whereby sometimes then you would be able to live with another corner of your artwork within the apartment. So on one hand, one might think, is this now an apartment or a place for artwork alone? No, it is really playing with the two and constantly having you to be there to enjoy in different parts and time of the year to be in another corner of the house with the artwork. And there are many things, I can't really go into the details today. Like I said, I just want to talk about the way how we operate and work. But there's so many things, like the way how the walls are lifted up by making the apartments very light, and the way how also the artificial light suggests sometimes even a sort of a balcony zone where the ceiling is closed, like if it is in double height space, etc. And that is the project I promised, the music theater in Graz, where this idea of the equal potential aspect of the project is twisted so that it also becomes a cantilever within the more fluid open spaces of this music theater, and then framed. But the frame, you will see that later on, is almost not visible. It's visible, and at the same time it disappears sometimes in the way how it is to be seen. Here you see the lobby area. And it's almost like I said, if you enter the lobby area, it's almost like if you experience music, like if it is so that you then see the amount of diversity in the spatial aspects so moving with you. It's almost like if the spaces are following you, like as we know it in the Mercedes-Benz Museum. Certain other parts of the production techniques were highly experimental, but at the same time controlled by so many engineers we worked with on this twist in the building, because the concrete was not poured down, it was pushed up in order to make sure that we would have not, and you see here, sorry, in half image, but pushed up in order to make not any gravel level on the edge of the concrete. And of course, you can imagine for the students in a building to operate like in a building like this, it's challenging. And as you can see here, the building, although during the day it generates this kind of closing off effect sometimes, but as you walk through it or towards it, then sometimes it opens itself up, and during the night even, it's almost like if the facade disappears. But as I said, the expansion of the profession, sorry for this primitive sketch, but talking about the grid in the beginning of the talk with how I refer back to Manhattan, it's not so that the grid has been the holy system, as we still believe, I think too much, of the way how we have to work with geometrical principles in architecture. with expansion of the potential of architecture and the way how we can stretch it up today, as I explained, we can maybe also put it in a circle, and there where maybe something is utile or conceptual, it's not so easy, and that's what I'd like to achieve in the work. And you may say if that operates this way, but that's not so easy to point at it anymore. Where is what in the project? Especially when you put it in a circle, this argument, this linear argument, or this idea of the linearity of the geometrical principles in architecture. If you put it in a circle, then it generates circular meanings, or, you know, as we know from the Möbius towards the trifold, it might generate even more complex meanings. Or like in this artwork, what I've also maybe showed too many times, but it's so wonderful that it is an artwork, but also an object where one can produce an art with. And I hope we can similarly say the same about architecture. Architecture, in my belief, needs to communicate and produce another architecture. Otherwise, it is no architecture. Thank you very much.